This is Father Sebastiaan, Master Fangsmith of the Sabretooth clan and Impresario of the Endless Night Vampire Ball. And you're listening to Hollywood Arcane, Vampire Culture, Music, and Magic, with your special guest host, JoHanna Moresco of the Cruise Shadows. We've taken a couple weeks off because we've been so busy with conventions.
It's true. And preparations for what?
We are getting ready for the New Orleans Vampire Ball, Endless Night style. How was Dragon Con?
Amazing.
Yeah?
Oh, it was so cool. It was so cool. We got to get you there. You would love it.
I plan on coming next year. Burning Man is not in my cards anymore.
Yeah, that happened.
Well, I was this close to going, and then it rained.
Yeah.
So
What
that
have
made
you been up to?
I've been working on my memoirs with Dr. Heather, and we've been doing a lot of work on the history of the 90s vampire culture. We're talking to Chichi Valenti, the founder of Mother. We're talking to Gabrielle Penapaz, Saint Eve, who created America's first absinthe brand.
Ooh,
Yeah, modern absinthe brand.
right.
And we're talking to a bunch of people from the 90s. So everybody will be like, wow, that's where it started.
Oh man.
And I'm really excited because I get to share a lot of the stories about how the Legacy came to be and how Clan Sabretooth was born. And it's like going right down a memory lane.
That's going to be so special.
Yeah, and I shaved my beard today because I got to wear a mask to go see my mom.
Oh, is that why you did that?
Yeah, she's really sick right now. So please give her your prayers. She was the first person I made fangs for.
Yeah, of course.
So I
All right. Fingers crossed for Mama Sabretooth.
yeah, Lady Anne I call her Lady Anne in my book. So I figured that it would be better to now I'm regretting it, but I look like an Amish vampire.
Versatility's good, and I think we found there's vampires from all walks of life, right?
Even Amish ones, Quaker
Yes.
Oats. Well, I'm more Quaker than Amish, but we'll
Right.
get there. So who do we have on the show today?
We have a very, very special guest today. He is an
Yeah.
international best-selling author, and he is the great grandnephew of Bram Stoker.
Ooh.
Today's guest is Dacre Stoker.
Hi guys, thank you so much for having me. What a wonderful treat for me to be seated next to you guys to talk all things vampires and Dracula and so on.
We love your shirt, Dacre.
Thank you. Sebastian, we've met a couple times, and you set a high standard of sartorial elegance, and I'm just trying to come close. But it's October, and I don't have a shirt for every single day of the week, but I'm trying to get up there. So I got some cool shirts to debut at different events this month.
You need a shirt sponsor. I know a couple people that would love to sponsor you.
Well, let's talk. If I can look even close to what you sport out on the scene, then I'll be a happy guy.
Neither of us can ever compare to JoHanna, though.
Now that's true. Let's not go there. Let's just let her be the
Oh,
incredible vamp beauty queen, and we'll leave it at
I'll lend you a sparkly gown anytime. Just let me know.
that.
So we have a tradition. We read a black veil, and it is especially for you because you, as the great grandnephew of Bram Stoker, um, have this. Pretty much, this is about your family.
Yeah. Today's Black Veil is about the modern vampire mythos. And for anyone who doesn't know, the Black Veil's Master Vampire Edition are written by Father Sebastiaan. They talk about all things vampire that you want to know. So today's veil, modern vampire mythos. The modern vampire mythos is defined in Black Veils as the collective impact of all the legends, film, literature, fantasy, and mythology related to the vampire from all time periods. From ancient times, almost every culture has included some sort of vampiric mythological figure in their superstitions and lore, ranging from the Lilith demons of ancient Sumerian and Jewish myth, the incubi and succubi of medieval folklore, the fairy-like Bob Sith of the Scottish Highlands, the Strigoi of Romania, the bloodthirsty gods of Central and South America, and the ghoulish predators of Asia and South Africa. These past legends have collectively given rise to our own modern vampire mythos. One can say that this modern mythos began with the Romantic movement literary work of author John William Polidori, the short story The Vampire, published on April 1st, 1819, featuring the suave British nobleman vampire character Lord Ruthven. This more modern view of the vampire was expanded upon in Victorian literature works, such as the lurid serialized penny dreadful Varney the Vampire and the Gothic horror of Carmilla in 1871. Then, all radically changed with the publication of Bram Stoker's Dracula in 1897. And from there, the modern vampire mythos exploded into mainstream culture in a very refined manner. The vampire mythos was truly defined and evolved in 20th century throughout thousands of incarnations in film, television, literature, role-playing games, video games, merchandise, and it even spawned an entire vampire lifestyle subculture. The biggest influences of the past 100 years on the vampire mythos, aside from Dracula in films from 1931, 58, 79, and 92, include Barnabas Collins from the Gothic daytime drama Dark Shadows, Anne Rice's Vampire Chronicles novels, Interview with the Vampire, published in 1975, and the tabletop role-playing game Vampire the Masquerade, released in 1991. All of these interpretations have influenced and illustrated what a modern vampire can be, that is regal, aristocratic, angelic anti-hero, one who is immortal, powerful, and highly social, and extremely independent. The vampire is a powerful being that many of us wish to become. We can see them reflected in our own primal desires and as a monster that we can relate to and many times sympathize with. This is the modern 21st century modern vampire mythos, and its spirit is the vampire current.
Well, well said and well written, Sebastiaan. I mean, I don't know what there else is to say at this point. You've covered all the bases.
Now?
It's over. I mean, we could go home.
All right,
If all your
interview's done.
listeners, if they get that, they got it. I mean, that's a great summary, by the way. Really, that's a great job.
Yeah, it was. I mean, the vampires changed my life, and the king of the vampires is definitely Dracula, and your grand uncle is responsible for that. And three great influences on the vampire world is Dracula, Anne Rice, and Vampire the Masquerade.
Yeah.
And you can see the eras evolve step by step. The eras move on.
Yeah, absolutely. I get questions like that, all the time. Oh, you're a family member. When did you first read the book? Or, what was it like as a kid? And I joke, and just bear with me. But it's like, yeah, when it was in the delivery room, and I came out of my mother, and they were the doctors holding the crucifix, like, watch it. Yes, put a little holy water on the little bugger. But it's like, we all evolve around. When did you read the book? When did you first become aware of the vampire mythos at your period in time? And I grew up, in the late 50s, early 60s. I went to boarding school, and the first vampire movie I ever saw was the Fearless Vampire Hunters. And
Cool.
that was my intro, even before I read Dracula. And then it was like, that was it. So I do ask that question of people when they say, what about your beginning? I say, well, that was mine. What about yours? And it's incredible that I get so many different genesis points from folks. They came into it on film, on stage, or Sesame Street, or so many on Dark Shadows, as you mentioned. So many different entry points, and then it goes in so many different directions.
The Count won the costume contest 3 years ago in LA.
No kidding.
Yeah, I dressed as the Count, and I was like, he's gonna win. There's no way he's gonna lose.
Somebody had guts to dress up as the Count. Is that at one of the Endless Night Balls?
Yeah. What a lot of people think is like, there's all these vampires out there that take shit so seriously. I mean, we take things seriously, like running a very solid event and our production, but we love a sense of humor in the Endless Night team. And it was when I saw it, I was like, some people were like, oh, come on. I'm like, that's awesome. What's wrong with that?
That's very, I mean, that's something like, JoHanna, when I've been to Dragon Con a couple of times, that's what people thrive to do, is find those obscure characters that are related, but you have to scratch your head and say, wait a sec.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, that's so cool. Good for you. And that would, the count would fall into that category. That's so cool.
The crowd loved it, and the crowd decides the winner. So
there we go. Yeah.
Excuse me, I must correct myself. The best dressed contest, because we don't have costumes. We have best dressed.
Yes, of course. There we go.
So we have some questions for you.
All righty.
What inspired you to write the sequel to Dracula?
Ah, yes. Well, we all have our starting point somewhere. I was not an author. I was a school teacher. I was an athletics coach. And when I actually wrote Dracula the Un-Dead, it was a product of getting contacted by Ian Holt, who was a film writer, and he had an idea to continue the '92 Coppola film. He loved the Coppola film so much that he wanted to sort of continue it in some way. So he wrote a screenplay about what Dracula didn't die at the end of the novel. And I throw this out to you as a starting point to answer my question, because that was really the genesis point for me. I had read Dracula a number of times, and it was like, wait a sec. Did my great-granduncle get it wrong, or did he get it right? The killing scene in the novel, different than some of the movies, was that Quincy Harker jumped on back of the leader wagon, ripped open the crate, and actually stabbed the Count with the Bowie knife, and Harker slit his throat. There was no stake involved. The head wasn't completely decapitated, and the Count crumbled into dust. And after he had this look of peace on his face and sort of a smirk. So that was the premises for Stoker and Holt to write this story. He believed it wasn't over. Then if it wasn't over, what happens? And I dig a little bit deeper and found that what was originally written by Bram, right after that knife went in, a volcano erupted, which would have, in fact, been very difficult for Dracula to escape, as well as the rest of the band of heroes. But for whatever reason, that was edited out. I could see it with my plain eyes. So that was the genesis for Dracula the Un-Dead, the continuation of the novel. And Ian Holt said, look, the screenplay hasn't gone anywhere. Let's turn it into a novel. Would you write some things that I need to understand about Bram Stoker? I said, hold on a sec. So if I'm going to get involved in this, I need to have a hand in writing, even though I'm not a polished writer. He said, no problem. We can get a good editor to help us. So I said, come back to me in a year. Let me do my research. And that year dramatically changed my life, Sebastiaan. Just like you said when you started, big change. I went off to museums, libraries, conferences, and I just had to immerse myself into sort of the world of Dracula, both scholarly and non-scholarly, to find out what the world knew about Bram, what I knew about Bram. And we actually placed him as a character in the story. And, the rest is history. Dracula the Un-Dead became an international bestseller, and it sort of put me on the map as a family member making a positive contribution to literature and popular culture. And since then, I've used that information to make graphic novels and so on. But that was that was the start way back in 2014 or no 2004. He got a hold of me, and then it took a year to research. It took another 4 years before we could actually write the book and get it properly edited and sold.
Before this, did anybody recognize you as a Stoker?
Well, not as a Stoker connected to Bram. Funnily, if my name Dacre Stoker comes from a cousin of Bram's, who was a famous submariner in World War I, if you can believe it, an Irishman in the British Navy. And there's also his brother was a champion tennis player at Wimbledon, if you can believe it. So up until that point, the sort of the vampire Stoker in my life was sort of still in the closet, and it hadn't emerged. We're in the coffin. It hadn't emerged just yet. And then it's like, okay, I'm all in. I was kind of tired of teaching school at the time and decided to really get into the writing, the research, the giving the lectures, and all that kind of good stuff.
Okay.
What's the most challenging aspect of continuing Bram Stoker's legacy?
Oh boy, I mean That's an easy question, and I'll tell you why. I have tremendously large shoes to fill. Bram Stoker's Dracula is known worldwide. He wrote, 11 other novels, many short stories. And one of the challenges I find is that there are people that think I'm just trying to capitalize on the name Stoker, that I'm not a producer. I'm more of a taker and try to jump on that gravy train that Bram created. And really, that's far from the truth. It's a matter of fact, when Ian and I created this book, and Alex Gallant helped us with the historical research, and the agent brought it to different publishers, they say, "Whoa, okay, we want to take a look at this. This is actually the prequel you see in front of you, Dracula." Same thing happened with this. Is it opens the doors having the name Stoker, but as these publishers say, it better be good, because people have high expectations and don't want to see just some kind of crap writing from somebody trying to ride the coattails of his famous relative. So, JoHanna, I'm constantly feeling that. And it's not a bad motivation to sort of, in a way, prove some of those people wrong, that I'm here to help promote Bram, protect his intellectual property, and add to the mythos of his Dracula, the mythos of who was Bram Stoker, what went into his writing, and help the world understand who the creator was of his famous creation. So that's my uphill struggle, and it's not bad to always have that. It's kind of like the athlete in me. You're always trying to struggle to be a little better. So let's always have a goal, and it's to sort of prove some of those people wrong.
In your research, what stood out to you when writing Dracula?
Okay. So there was a point in my Dracula the Un-Dead research that just stuck with me, and that was finding out about the childhood illness of Bram. That he was, we think, debilitated. We're not exactly sure. He's written two things in a book that he wrote about his boss, Henry Irving, that I never knew what it was like to stand upright. I was a sickly child, and I had all sorts of thoughts in my mind for 7 years. We don't really know what the illness was. I think he was probably bloodlet. I think he had respiratory allergies and fevers and so on. But when I found that out, that was a really aha moment about the illness, his recovery. But it also stuck with me because I was a teacher at this time, and I've taught lots of middle school and high school kids and athletes all the way up to the Olympic level. And I saw people have injuries. I saw people overcome massive challenges. And I was imagining when I was writing with J.D. Barker Dracula, because this story does start with Bram's difficult birth and his childhood illness and how he overcomes it. How is a guy going to overcome this tremendous physical handicap, 7 years being debilitated? But what does it do to his mind? And how does it affect a guy develop a very dark sense of imagination, who goes on later in his life to write horror stories, and of course the story Dracula, of people dragging themselves out of the grave. And so that to me was a real aha moment, and really interesting, Sebastiaan, portion of him as a person. And that's a main part of Dracula.
Okay.
What do you think sets Dracula apart from other vampire novels? What's different about it?
Well, first of all, I gotta keep going back to the two of them. The two books are somewhat connected. Obviously, one's a prequel, one's a sequel, and you got Dracula right in the middle. J.D. Barker and I decided to write Dracula in the epistolary style, which is diaries, journals, accounts that are sort of happening firsthand. Holt and I did not write Dracula the Un-Dead that way because, quite frankly, we weren't good enough writers to do it. It's not an easy way to write a story. Bram Stoker wrote Dracula that way. That's probably why it took him 7 years to do it, and it took JD and I 3 years to crank this one out. But it was good for a separation sort of labor, because I could write parts, he could write parts, and then he would weave them together. And so Dracula is set starting in 1847 when Bram was born, but it was written in that epistolary style where it is about 70% true. I got newspaper articles, I've got letters that Bram written, journals, and they were all integrated. A few names and places were changed, but my gosh, it mostly is true. But as we know, it's somewhat fictional to make it an easier read.
Okay, can you speak to the importance of Bram Stoker's original novel and its impact on literature and pop culture today?
Well, yeah, I'm so glad in your veil you mentioned the other stories, Polidori, Malcolm Reimer, and Joseph Sheridan Le Fanu. They started, they got credit for vampires in literature and fiction. Prior to that, as we all know, there was vampire in treaties and thought of being real accounts around the world in many different cultures. What Dracula did, though, was kind of bring all of that together in a readable form that, again, this story felt real. He placed everything in real time. He actually took 7 years to write the novel, 1890 to 1897, but he set it in 1893. And we know that because his notes live in the Rosenbach Museum in Philadelphia. And my God, he daytimed the whole thing. He literally, at a day timer, has all the events. So it is done in real time. You know exactly the train schedules that he used. They were accurate. The time would take a letter or a telegram to get from A to B. So what he did was capitalize on the end of the Victorian era, the predominant feeling at the time was that strict religion was beginning to wane, and the occult, mesmerism, spiritualism, that was all on the rise. The science, modern science at the time was beginning to question everything. So many people were beginning to question the church. And so it opened the door for the power of, as I said, the occult. And that's where Bram slid in. He's like, okay, if people are beginning to question this stuff, let me bring a character to life, which was a little bit of Vlad the Impaler, a little bit of Henry Irving and Mephistopheles, this devil creature. Let me bring him to life and bring him to London, where people are actually powerless to do anything about him. And then one last part of the question is, he did it on the heels of the Jack the Ripper murders, where the police and science couldn't stop Jack the Ripper. So Bram made it even more horrifying. How can you stop this count from Transylvania coming in on the Demeter? You can't stop him either. So funnily enough, that's why there's no police in the story, is I believe, when I looked at the notes and the original novel, that Bram is saying, well, if the police can't stop Jack the Ripper, how the hell are they going to stop a supernatural creature? So he put together a group of people, this wonderful Van Helsing and an aristocrat and a lawyer and the Mina, all these, and the American, all these people that had great faith in goodness. So big question about that impact, but it had such an impact because it was, really, it gave people the illusion that it was real. And one final thing is, it allowed people, in years to come, we're still doing it, to take a character of Count Dracula who is not very defined in the story. He's not that well known. He's known in the minds of the characters, but we don't know exactly who he was or where he came from. We know a little bit. And that gave him tremendous freedom, or excuse me, it gave all the writers tremendous freedom to go with it in their own direction and not exhaust the appetite of the audiences and the readers, because he really is a guy that only shows up in about 30% of the novel, but he's in the minds of the characters most of the novel.
It's really true.
What advice would you give to aspiring writers and creatives who are fans of the horror genre?
Well, I'd say, read a variety of stories in horror. Don't get stuck and pigeonholed in just vampires or just witches or just vampires. Read a variety, and do the same thing in watching. Watch film, watch streaming, go to plays. Go visit Father Sebastiaan at the Endless Night Balls. You can see what people, the vibe that comes with it. So I have learned that lesson myself. I thought, okay, relative of this famous guy. I'm going to read Dracula. And what else do I need to read? What else am I going to figure out how to participate and be involved as a positive member of this community? And it's taken a long time because I'm busy with my coaching and everything else to go to New Orleans, to go to LA, to go to Dragon Con, go to different conventions, to go to these different social events, read different authors, Stephen King, Anne Rice, and all the other guys in between. There's some wonderful writers. So it's like, don't limit yourself. And the last thing is, if you do decide to write something, have the courage to write what you want. I know everybody says that. Write what you want. And if you have to end up self-publishing, do it, because if you got to get it out, do yourself the favor of working hard, get a good editor, to help you make sure grammar, spelling, all those things are taken care of, because nothing is worse than somebody self-publishes and it's grammatically incorrect, or they just, were slack at it. Pay the money to get a good editor, if you have to.
One question I have that we didn't prepare for is, was Vlad Tepes the original inspiration for Dracula, or is that a myth?
Oh, I'm really glad you asked that. It's one of the inspirations. So here we go. I'll try to keep this brief. I know the books that Bram used for his research. And it's lucky because, and this is if you're a librarian out there, you'll be happy to hear this. Bram Stoker went into a number of libraries. Marsh's Library, Trinity Library, the London Library, and the Whitby Library are the ones that I know of where you literally see on paper the names of the books that he checked out. The London Library, unfortunately, doesn't have those lists anymore because they burned in fires because of the bombings. But Bram Stoker actually wrote in the books with a pencil. And I know his writing, so I've helped verify. So bottom line, Sebastiaan, is I know that there was 2 books, one by William Wilkinson and one by James Samuelson, that Bram checked out. And I know that he took notes from both of those books and put them into his notes in the Rosenbach Museum. So they had an impact. And they mentioned Vlad Dracula, Dracula meaning devil. And they mentioned his history and his characteristics. Didn't say he was a vampire, but that's not what Bram was looking for. He needed a connection to the devil. And that name Dracula in Valachian language meant devil. Also meant dragon. But he didn't know that at the time. It didn't matter, but we now know it does. But Wilkinson and Samuelson didn't know the dragon part. So Bram merged a lot of things in the novel. He merged the castle, fictional castle, and he merged, I believe, Henry Irving and his role of playing different characters. A shape-shifting, dominating type man, tall, striking in his image, nocturnal life of being a theater guy, whose most famous role, besides Merchant of Venice, was Mephistopheles, the devil. So I believe that was the merger, the historical background of Vlad the Impaler from a country, a region that had all these Transylvanian superstitions that he read about. But he had the persona, the image of Irving, and Irving playing Mephistopheles. So Vlad Tepes gets part credit for who he was and what his history was. It's all mentioned there in chapter 2. When he rants to Harker and says, I come from this, Attila's blood is in my veins, and all this, mentions all these other Strigoi and all that.
Where does the rumor come from that he wasn't based on him?
I think here's what has happened is people in Romania, and I've been there now 14 times on tours and research, they get kind of their back up when people say, our hero, Vlad Dracula, Vlad the Impaler, was the model for this iconic Hollywood character. He wasn't a vampire, for God's sake. He didn't drink blood. He might have been bloodthirsty. So that is, I think, the beginning of it. They're defensive that we, my family, and subsequent movie makers have made that connection. And if you guys probably know more about the films than I do, but obviously the Coppola film definitely connected Vlad Dracula to Count Dracula. Dracula Untold did the same thing. Other earlier, I think Jack Palance in a film connected Vlad Dracula to Count Dracula more than Bram did. But Bram was more suggestive. But there's no question, if people would read my books or listen to my lectures, I give the proof And I show images of those two books that Bram checked out and the connection that he saw to Vlad the Impaler.
Are there any other works of Bram Stoker's that you might want to revive or adapt?
I've really fallen in love with a short story called The Squaw. And nowadays it's not politically correct to use that term. So Chris McCauley and I took that short story and changed the name to The Virgin's Embrace. It is a story of Bram's honeymoon with his wife in Nuremberg, Germany, where they meet an American, very much like Quincy Morris, who comes over very brash. And he talks about when I was, in the plains of Montana, or, and shot this Indian, that's where the Squaw name of it came from. But it has an incredible climax in a torture chamber in the castle of Nuremberg that has that Iron Virgin of Nuremberg, the spike thing that closes. I don't want to spoil it, but JoHanna, I'm trying to revive some of those short stories that they're public domain, people can find them online, but bring them back in a way that they're more exciting. So that's the first one that I've done, and I'm trying to work on others. I've also really closely attached to Dracula's Guest. Now, Dracula's Guest was once part of the original manuscript of Dracula. It was edited out. And I've now got, just like I have answering Sebastian's question, I've got proof from the original manuscript that it was once part of not the novel Dracula, because it wasn't turned the novel. It was part of that 102 pages taken out. And I love the short story. It is Jonathan Harker en route to Transylvania that actually stops in Munich as the train schedule allows and doesn't allow him to leave the next day. And really, some really weird stuff happened. Very, very vampiric. So I don't want to spoil it to folks, but if you can, other people have turned it into a graphic novel. I would love to, incorporate it somehow into something in the Stokerverse that Chris McCauley and I are working on, a graphic novel or something else. But those are two in particular. But I'm trying to slowly, highlight some of the other stories. The Mystery of the Sea is my second favorite supernatural story that Bram wrote, other than Dracula. So yeah, that's part of my mission.
Do you have any upcoming projects or collaborations you can share with us today?
Yes. I mentioned the graphic novel, the continuation of Dracula. Here it is on the screen. This is the from the Stokerverse, Macaulay and Stoker, Dracula the Return edition number 2. Last year, the first edition came out, and this one's coming out, The Cult of the White Worm, on Friday the 13th at crowdfunding Zoop. So that was the first edition you see right here, Cult of the White Worm. That story happens right after the knife goes into Dracula, and we have created a story incorporating the actual ending of Dracula where the volcanic eruption happens. And it's like, well, how would Dracula actually get revived? And the White Worm is an homage to a great being that Bram wrote, the last book he ever wrote, The Lair of the White Worm. And it is based on the Lamberton worm in British mythology, of this huge, ugly worm creature in the bottom of the earth that is all powerful and supernatural. That's actually Dracula's boss. Slight spoiler alert. And he's the one that helps Dracula revive and come back to undead life. And then the second edition that you just saw that's coming out on Zoop, this is sort of what happens when Dracula comes to London, and the characters in London begin to think, well, what the hell? I thought we killed this guy. And we actually blend in characters. And you saw that other copy of the front cover, if you could put that up. There we go. That's actually, spoiler alert, Carmela. And I won't tell you much more, but Carmela is actually, let's say, related to Count Dracula. So she makes the appearance. And we actually have, this is a 4 comic series. So number 2 is coming up. That's happening. I've also got a couple of a documentary film in the works with a fellow called Jason Figgis, who's an Irish documentary filmmaker. It's called Father of Dracula, and it's very close to the lectures that I give, the audiovisual presentation that I give. I've got a short story with Leverett Butts that is, he's a professor at University of North Georgia. We've been writing it for, God, about a year and a half now, and we're in our final edits. But it is the story of Bram Stoker's summer in Cruden Bay, Scotland, where he actually wrote the novel Dracula. And it's sort of along the vein of Dracula. Of course, none of the characters are the same other than Bram, but it is weird stuff that happens to him when he's trying to write the novel. And, we all get, and Sebastiaan, you probably got writer's block from some time. We all get that occasionally. And how do you overcome it, especially when there's some supernatural crap going on to stop you from writing it? So those are the probably most important things at the time that I'm working on.
I the other night I was talking to a friend on FaceTime, and I showed how thick my book was, and this is my small book, and
oh yeah, oh boy,
and this is the primer book, Black Veil.
Yeah,
and Strig of Eye is the next one, and that one is twice the size. And I give it to people, and they're like, "I got to read all this to do this," and I'm like, "Yep." And people come back to me in 2 or 3 years. So I haven't read Dracula since I was a child, but I got into vampires from the Peter Pan remake, Lost Boys.
Oh yeah.
That was my definite entry into vampires when I was 13.
Can we talk about that film now just for a couple minutes?
Absolutely.
Because it's one of those that it was kind of sitting out there. Kiefer Sutherland, it's like, oh yeah, this guy loved everything he's done later in his life. But early in his life, I mean, my God, he was incredible. And, I looked at that and I thought, okay, I'm going to look at this with an open mind. Not all vampire movies have to, be Dracula-esque, but there were some very cool homages along the way. And I'm just going to give you some things that I thought were quite cool. But for a movie that came out in 1987, I mean, this was when I was in my prime too. It was so cool seeing, the fashions, like, oh God, did we really look like that? I taught kids that, had the haircuts like that and wore clothes like that and go to the arcade. But it was like, I love the two Frog brothers, the hunters, that was so neat. But there was a lot to this movie. There was some humor to it. There was obviously drama to it. There was suspense. I love the fact that the mother's name was Lucy, like obviously a little homage.
Oh, I didn't even put 2 and 2 together. Oh my God.
I mean, maybe so. So those are, and also the other cool thing is when David says the earthquake at Hudson's Point opened up this chasm and this resort, went in, I'm thinking the whole time, I wonder if the writers knew about the volcano in Transylvania that, was the end of the novel Dracula. So my mind was going 100 miles an hour while watching it. What do you guys think about that movie? What did you like about it?
Well, I have something to share with you. Hold on, let me grab it real quick.
Mm-hmm.
We have on Vampire Magazine a series of things. Rob, I'm going to send this to you. I'm going to send it to our producer, Rob Cohen, who's an amazing guy. Just texted it to you, Rob. So I love branding and marketing because as a chaos magician, I love symbols and charging them with ideas, like the golden arches of McDonald's or the Playboy Bunny logo. So I created this logo back in 1996 for Vampire Magazine with the big swooshy V that I had custom designed. And there was even fonts that were inspired by it. And so I created these t-shirts, and in the vampire community, we have things called halos. And I created a network for the vampire subculture in the 1990s that basically became everything in the vampire scene's based on, and it's called the Sanguinarium. So I created this network, and as you can see, we have a vintage shirt here from 1987, Lost Halo, Santa Carla, California.
Oh, yes. Yes.
And it says, your elders encourage you to feed responsibly. It's a Jack Daniels inspired, so ancient brand number 23.
That's so cool.
And So that's a T-shirt that's available on vampiremag.com.
That is so, and obviously inspired by the film. Sure, for sure.
Yes. The first Halo was actually Gotham Halo in New York City in 1995. But
Okay.
what's funny about it is I just made that shirt up out of inspiration yesterday, and I was like, "Wait, we gotta have a Santa Carla shirt," because I have a very good friend who's the real Jax from Sons of Anarchy. His name is Scotty Grow, and he's a Hell's Angel, and he's the nicest Hell's Angel you've ever met in your life. Okay,
Breaks the mold.
and yes, he breaks the mold. He's so kind and gentle and fun. So there's a Santa Clarita where Carla was. I encourage the Hells Angels to make supporter shirts that say Carla Hells Angels.
That's murder capital of the.
I'm not gonna say
No.
about the club of the
Yeah.
Hells Angels, but they love their whippets.
Oh, that's cool. Well, that's the so many people that I see and they say, "Let's talk movies, Dacre." I say, "Well, I haven't seen that many," but now I can say, I'm up in the Lost Boys. I also think the ending is pretty cool. I mean, I always look at how the vampires get killed. Have they followed some of the same rules that Bram Stoker established? He didn't invent them; he just took them from different places in folklore, mythology, and inserted them. And not everybody has to follow all the same rules. You just have to make them believable for your film or the universe that you have created for your story. But I love the fact that the father, who was putting in the fence posts, and I saw him putting the fence posts in with the sharp end upwards, and then the very end of the story comes crashing through the house with his truck, and the big pole with the sharp end goes right into the head vampire and takes him out. I also like the fact that Max, the head vampire who was trying to date the mother, was totally unassuming throughout the whole
Yeah,
movie. He was you don't even think about it. But then again, Sebastiaan and JoHanna, just think about it. Modern vampires are the ultimate shapeshifters, right? They don't have to look like Bela Lugosi or Christopher Lee to fit in, and that's why they're such a good weapon. And so he was so convincing as this sort of regular guy from the from the 80s that he could sneak up on them all. But he certainly had to end with the big stake and then the massive blowing up in the fireplace, and that was very cool.
well, my favorite line in Lost Boys is one thing I couldn't stand about Santa Clarita or Carla is all the damn vampires.
There was some cool little lines like that. That the Sam didn't Sam the son the younger brother something like said something was like, "Oh, Bub, you're going out with vampires tonight. Mom's gonna really not like that much," or it was something very understated. There's just some funny stuff, but the humor didn't detract from the horror of it all.
I
That's what I
know.
like about it.
Is
It
it a
bounced.
is it a comedy or is it a horror movie? But I think we need to save this for Vampire Movie Council.
Okay, we will. Let's save that.
Dacre, thank you so much for coming on Hollywood Arcane. It is awesome to have you here. JoHanna, it's always lovely to see you. I can't wait for Halloween. Dacre, next time we do a Dracula theme, you got to be our guest of honor in New Orleans.
Well, we got to jump ahead of this because, as you know, you've got a big thing going on Halloween down New Orleans. I'm heading there tomorrow to do some things with Marita at the Vampire Cafe and her new apothecary. So excited about that. But I usually, and I don't go every year, but I need to know in advance because I'd love to do something with you guys, Dracula related, in one of your balls. I'm going to Dublin, Ireland again this year for the Bram Stoker Festival. Maybe I take a year off next year and we do something together.
That's a good idea. So, where do we find you?
Well, you can find me at dacrestoker.com, my personal website, and then the stokerverse.com is where all my new products are being mentioned, an RPG game, a board game, graphic novels. And if you want to learn more about Bram Stoker, I forgot to tell your producer about this, but bramstokerestate.com. My wife and I run that whole website for all kinds of things to deal with the whole Stoker family. So if you want to the scholarly world, go there. You want to hear about me and my projects and books, either dacrestoker.com or the stokerverse.com. There you go. Thanks, Rob. bramstokerestate.com, all things Bram Stoker. But thank you guys both for having me. To all your listeners, have a safe and spooky Halloween season.
Thank you, Dacre. So, Johanna, how'd you like Dacre?
He is the coolest guy. I feel like we learned a lot.
I've met him twice, and he's really cool, and he's really captivating in person.
Yeah, I got to go. I think the tour was called Stoker on Stoker, and he brought all kinds of cool artifacts from the Stoker estate. Papers that Bram actually wrote on, pieces of his journal, stuff like that. And he educated all of us about it and told us some of the history of how Dracula was written. So if anyone's listening and you have a chance to go see him in person, super cool.
Awesome. So we have the Halloween Endless Night coming up, and we're doing Temple of the Dark Goddess. Have you
Yes.
decided on which goddess you're going to be?
Oh, I hadn't thought of it like that. I was just ready to rock and roll.
Okay, I think that we have a little show with the Crook Shadows up there,
Hmm.
so
Yeah.
you're gonna be have to be in Crook Shadows costume.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I'm really excited. You guys haven't played since 2016. It's been 8 years.
Can't wait.
I've known you that long. That's crazy.
I know. I know. And that, I don't know if you remember, but that is the ball that we met at. You had us in New Orleans.
And I was like, "Who's that fabulous violinist up there?"
Yeah. And I was like, this place is cool. I kind of like it. I might come back.
Cool. Um, so do you have any new makeup products coming out?
Ooh, new makeup products. I do. I can't announce it yet, but it is actually a collaboration with a very cool band in the goth scene. The singer is well known for his makeup looks, and so he
Ooh.
will have a palette made by me for his band.
I
So
can see
really,
rock
really
and
cool
roll with
stuff.
that.
Yeah. So you can all guess, but I can't say what it is.
I think I know. I got a hint, but
Yeah.
let's see what happens. All
Yep.
right. So I'll see you in New Orleans.
All right. See you soon.